Imagine inventing a cure for death itself. Like you actually pull a man back from the underworld. You conquer humanity's ultimate biological limit.
Which, you'd think would be a pretty big deal.
Right. You'd expect a parade, a Nobel Prize. But your actual reward, getting instantly obliterated by a thunderbolt hurled by the king of the gods.
Yeah, just completely nuked from orbit.
Exactly. And you, as a modern listener, probably expect heroic achievements to get rewarded, right? You're likely familiar with the blockbuster heroes like Hercules or Zeus. But today, in this deep dive, we are unpacking a stack of sources from Edith Hamilton's classic book, Mythology. Specifically, we're looking at what she calls the less important myths.
Though, to be fair, calling them less important really masks what these stories are actually doing.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, they don't deal with the grand creation of the universe. They deal with the mundane, often petty reality of what happens when ordinary mortals just kind of bump into unchecked, terrifying, divine power.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because our mission today is to uncover the bizarre logic of ancient mythology. When you read these accounts, you realize the gods' punishments almost never match the crime.
No, they really don't.
In the ancient world, it didn't really matter if your intentions were pure or if you were just profoundly wicked. The desires you have, whether you're craving wealth or food or love, they're going to lead to some wildly unpredictable, unintended consequences.
Well, it's because we constantly try to map our modern moral framework onto these sources, right? We expect this invisible hand of justice where good is rewarded and evil is punished.
Yeah, the classic karmic balance.
Exactly. But that framework simply does not exist here. These myths operate as like an ecosystem of power. They're about the mechanics of human folly intersecting with gods who have zero accountability.
Folly is actually the perfect starting point. Let's look at characters consumed by literal physical appetites, starting with the fatal flaw of King Midas. You know the phrase, the Midas touch.
Right, everyone knows that one.
But Hamilton's compilation gives us the exact psychological mechanism of how this disaster unfolded. And it wasn't born out of malicious greed. It was born out of a complete lack of critical thinking.
Yeah, Midas was the king of Phrygia, ruling over these magnificent rose gardens. And one day, his servants find this old, intoxicated satyr named Silenus just passed out in the middle of the roses.
Which is such a funny image.
It really is. Silenus had wandered away from the entourage of Bacchus, the god of wine. And Midas's people think this is hilarious. They wrap the sleeping guy in garlands, put wreaths on him, and just parade him around.
And Midas actually entertains him for 10 days before taking him back to Bacchus. And Bacchus is so thrilled to have his follower back that he offers Midas any single wish he wants.
Any wish at all.
Right. And Midas, without even taking a breath to think about it, just blurts out that he wants whatever he touches to turn to gold.
And Bacchus knows exactly what a catastrophe this is going to be, but he grants it anyway. I mean, the underlying tragedy here is that Midas has a fundamental inability to project his desires into the future.
He literally doesn't see the structural flaw until his very next meal.
Exactly. He sits down at his banquet table, starving. He lifts a piece of bread to his mouth, and right before his teeth can break the crust, the molecular structure just shifts.
It becomes a cold, heavy lump of gold.
Right. By his own command, he has permanently severed himself from the biological necessity of eating.
It's the ultimate cautionary tale about rapid advancement without, an ethical or practical framework. It's like a tech company inventing a hyper-advanced AI and just turning it on before writing the safety protocols.
That's a great analogy. You have the ultimate tool, but it's completely hostile to your own survival.
So Midas has to run back to Bacchus in an absolute panic, begging him to revoke the favor. And Bacchus tells him to travel to the source of the river Pactolus and wash his hands to strip the magic away. Which, by the way, was the ancient explanation for why the sands of that specific river were full of gold.
What's fascinating here is that Midas's encounter with near starvation teaches him absolutely nothing about the danger of the divine.
He learns nothing.
Literally nothing. His particular brand of foolishness strikes a second time. But this time it shifts from wealth to art and ego.
Oh, right, the musical contest. So later on, Midas gets tapped to be an umpire in a contest between Apollo, the sun god, playing this magnificent silver lyre.
And Apollo is a major cosmic deity.
Right, and on the other side you have Pan, a rustic earthbound god playing tunes on his reed pipes. The main umpire is the mountain god Tmolus, who correctly awards the victory to Apollo.
Because Apollo's music was unmatched by anything except the muses themselves.
Exactly. But Midas decides to pipe up and publicly declared that he actually prefers Pan's performance.
Talk about a catastrophic misreading of the room. He assumes he's participating in, like, a subjective art critique. He completely forgets the volatile power dynamics at play.
And Apollo is insulted. He basically tells Midas, if your ears are so dull and dense that they can't appreciate divine music, they need a shape that reflects that density.
So with just a thought, Apollo transforms Midas's ears into the long, furry ears of a donkey.
Just for having a bad opinion.
Well, yeah, Midas wasn't trying to overthrow Apollo. He just lacked ordinary prudence. Common sense should tell you that when a cosmic god is competing against a minor rustic deity, you always side with the cosmic power. It's just basic survival of the fittest.
So Midas tries to suppress the evidence of his stupidity. He starts wearing this special cap to cover the donkey ears. But obviously his barber has to see them to do his job.
Right, the barber is sworn to absolute secrecy.
But holding on to this bizarre truth is just agonizing for the guy. He eventually cracks. He walks out to an empty field, digs a hole in the dirt, and whispers, King Midas has ass's ears directly into the ground.
He literally buries the secret.
Yeah, and he feels so relieved. But when spring arrives, reeds sprout from that exact patch of dirt. And whenever the wind blows, the reeds broadcast the buried secret across the entire landscape.
It's a brilliant illustration of how the ancient mind viewed truth, you know. You cannot bury the consequences of your folly. The natural world itself will eventually betray you.
Right. Now, if that's what happens to someone who is just foolish, the stakes must be wildly different for someone who is actively malicious. Let's look at Erysichthon. His appetite wasn't an accident, it was deliberate destruction.
Right. He decides he wants to harvest lumber from a giant oak tree in a grove that is strictly sacred to Ceres, the goddess of agriculture.
And he is repeatedly warned to stop. His own servants are too terrified to swing their axes. The dryads, the nymphs bound to the trees, they literally beg him to reconsider.
But he just grabs an axe himself and hacks into the trunk. And the visual Hamilton relays here is striking. Blood physically pours out of the bark as he chops.
That is so creepy.
It really is. And a voice from deep inside the oak explicitly warns him of Ceres' impending wrath. But he ignores the blood, ignores the voice, and chops the tree down anyway.
And Ceres' retaliation is swift. She dispatches a dryad to the bleakest region imaginable to summon famine. She orders famine to take up residence inside Erysichthon.
So under the cover of darkness, Famine slips into his bedroom, wraps her skeletal arms around his sleeping body, and breathes herself directly into his veins.
The infection takes hold immediately. He wakes up consumed by this raging, insatiable need to eat. But wait, let me pause here. I always struggle to connect the punishment to the crime in this one.
How so?
Well, he commits what is essentially an environmental crime. He destroys a piece of nature. Why is his punishment a bottomless hunger? The texts say the more meat he crammed down his throat, the more he starved. It feels like an arbitrary paradox.
I see what you mean, but it's not a paradox at all. It's a perfect, terrifying symmetry. To the ancient mind, destroying a sacred grove wasn't just vandalism, it was cosmic theft.
Oh, I see.
He consumed a piece of the natural world that did not belong to him. Therefore, Ceres curses him to become a black hole of consumption. It's an escalation of Midas's plight. Erysichthon can chew and swallow, but the food provides zero nourishment.
So he just burns through his entire vast fortune buying massive shipments of food.
Exactly. He is quite literally starving to death while actively eating.
And the consumption leads to a total collapse of his humanity. When he bankrupts himself buying groceries, he resorts to selling his own daughter into slavery to fund his grocery bill.
Which is just horrific.
Beyond horrific. The daughter is terrified and prays to Poseidon on the shoreline to save her. And Poseidon actually intervenes. He shapeshifts her into a male fisherman. The slave buyer walks up, asks the fisherman where the girl went, and the disguised daughter just shrugs and says she hasn't seen anyone.
So she escapes and returns to her father.
Right. But Erysichthon doesn't view this divine rescue as a sign to stop. He views his shapeshifting daughter as a renewable financial resource.
Yeah, he leverages her divine gift for his own addiction. He sells her repeatedly, and Poseidon is forced to continually transform her.
Like into a mare or a bird, right?
Exactly, into various animals just so she can escape her buyers and go back home. But eventually, the revenue from trafficking his own child isn't enough to satisfy the demands of the curse.
He runs out of external resources to consume, so he turns inward. Erysichthon begins to butcher and devour his own physical body until there is nothing left. The appetite literally eats itself.
It's incredibly dark, and if Erisicthon shows us the lethal end of consuming material resources, we see a parallel danger when mortals try to consume affection. In these mythic structures, romantic desire is rarely gentle.
Oh, absolutely not.
It's a volatile force, and the collateral damage it causes to innocent bystanders is staggering.
Which brings us to Glaucus and Scylla. Glaucus starts out as a completely unremarkable mortal fisherman. He's out on a green meadow by the sea, counting his catch, when something inexplicable happens.
The dead fish start munching on the grass beneath them, they reanimate, and they just flop their way back into the ocean.
So Glaucus, driven by this intense curiosity, grabs a handful of this magic grass and eats it himself.
And it acts as an immediate biological override. He is seized by this overwhelming compulsion to join the water. He dives into the waves, the sea gods welcome him, and they petition Ocean and Tethys to strip away his mortal constraints.
He wakes up as a fully realized sea god, complete with a fish's tail and sea-green hair, which sounds like a fantastic upgrade until he falls completely in love with a beautiful nymph named Scylla.
Right.
Scylla takes one look at this half-man, half-marine creature emerging from the surf and flees in absolute terror. Glaucus is heartbroken. He travels to the island of Circe, deeply powerful enchantress, to beg for a magical love potion to soften Scylla's heart.
But the narrative takes a sharp, dangerous turn here. Because while Glaucus is pouring his heart out, Circe actually becomes infatuated with him.
Of course she does.
She tries to seduce the new sea god, but Glaucus flatly rejects her. He declares that trees will sprout on the ocean floor and seaweed will cover the mountain peaks before his love for Scylla ever fades.
It's a very poetic but brutal rejection. And you'd think Circe, with all her magical power, would punish Glaucus for the slight. But she doesn't even touch him.
She doesn't. Because power rarely strikes directly at the source of its emotional pain. It strikes at whatever is most vulnerable. Circe's ego is bruised, and she needs a target. Scylla is completely innocent, but she is the object of Glaucus's affection, which makes her the perfect proxy for Circe's revenge. So Circe brews an incredibly potent poison, locates the specific secluded bay where Scylla likes to bathe, and taints the water.
And the moment Scylla steps into her bath, her body violently mutates. Hideous serpents and ferocious dog heads erupt from her torso. She is permanently fused to the rock outcropping, trapped in endless misery.
She becomes the legendary, nightmarish monster that future heroes like Jason and Odysseus have to navigate past.
It is so infuriating. Scylla was just existing. She wanted to take a bath in peace, and she gets turned into a maritime horror show because an enchantress couldn't handle getting dumped by a guy Scylla didn't even like.
It's the very definition of displaced punishment. In the divine ecosystem, fairness is totally irrelevant. Circe had the magical leverage, she had the emotional wound, and Scylla was merely the path of least resistance.
It's basically the ultimate shooting the messenger scenario. Now, if the Greek myths show us romance as a vehicle for collateral damage, the Roman traditions offer a slightly different approach.
A highly manipulative one, yes.
Definitely. Take the story of Pomona and Vertumnus. Pomona is a dedicated orchard nymph. She isolates herself in her gardens, ignores the wild woods, and completely shuts out any male suitors. She just wants to graft branches and tend to her fruit trees.
But Vertumnus is obsessed with her. Knowing she won't allow him near her in his true form, he engages in a campaign of relentless deception.
Just constant disguises.
Exactly. He dresses as a reaper carrying barley, a clumsy herdsman, a vine pruner. He adopts these personas simply to breach her walls and stare at her while she works.
And his grand finale involves disguising himself as a frail old woman. He approaches Pomona, kisses her in a way that the ancient sources note felt distinctly ungrandmotherly, and sits her down for a lecture.
Right. He points to an elm tree nearby that is structurally supporting a heavy purple grapevine. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Vertumnus is deploying a masterful rhetorical strategy here.
Okay, how so?
Well, he's speaking to Pomona in her own dialect, the language of botany and cultivation. He observes that the elm tree, standing alone, produces nothing of value. And the grapevine, without the tree's support, would collapse into the mud and rot.
Oh, I see.
Only by intertwining do they achieve their ultimate purpose. It's a highly sophisticated, naturalistic argument for partnership.
Right, here's where it gets really interesting, though. You're praising his rhetorical strategy, but right after this beautiful botanical metaphor, Vertumnus takes a sharp, dark turn.
He does.
Still disguised as the old woman, he basically says you should really marry Vertumnus. And by the way, Venus despises women who reject suitors. Then he recounts this horrific tale of Anaxarete, a woman who coldly rejected a man named Ephes until he hanged himself from her gatepost.
And in response, Venus turned Anaxarete into a literal stone statue.
Exactly. How is this framed as a romance? It sounds like a thinly veiled mob boss threat.
You're entirely correct to spot the coercion. It is a threat wrapped in poetry. Vertumnus drops the old woman disguise, reveals himself as this glowing, handsome youth, and Pomona yields to him.
But the underlying mechanism is a threat.
Yes, the persuasion relies on weaponizing the arbitrary cruelty of the gods. He's explicitly stating, comply or face divine petrification. And in their universe, it's a compelling argument because Venus genuinely operates that way.
So if they weaponize divine trauma just to win a romantic debate, it completely recontextualizes how they handle actual high-stakes crimes. When we look at issues of life, death, and murder, the divine justice system appears entirely broken.
Oh, completely. Let's trace the origin of Aesculapius.
Asclepius' story begins in tragedy. His mother, a mortal woman named Coronis, is pregnant with a child of Apollo, and in a massive lapse of judgment, she has an affair with a mortal man, somehow believing she could hide her infidelity from the god of truth.
Which is never going to work. Apollo's sacred bird, the raven, which at the time had brilliantly white feathers, flies to him to report the affair.
And Apollo is so blinded by rage that he instantly curses the messenger, scorching the raven's feathers permanently black. Coronis is condemned to die on a funeral pyre.
But as the flames rise, Apollo experiences this sudden wave of paternal grief. He reaches into the fire, extracts his unborn son, and delivers the infant Aesculapius to Chiron, the wise centaur, to be raised and educated.
And under Chiron's mentorship, Aesculapius transcends ordinary medicine. He becomes a master healer. He reaches a terrifying pinnacle of skill where he actually accepts a massive fee to reverse death itself. He successfully brings a man, often identified as Hippolytus, back from the underworld.
He literally cures death. From a human perspective, he is the ultimate savior.
Exactly. So how does Zeus, the supreme ruler of the cosmos, react to this unparalleled medical breakthrough?
This raises an important question about the structural integrity of the ancient universe. To Zeus, Aesculapius isn't a medical pioneer. He is an existential threat. Death is the absolute boundary that separates the mortal realm from the divine. By conquering death, Aesculapius committed the ultimate act of hubris. He disrupted the natural order. So Zeus doesn't put him on trial. He simply hurls a thunderbolt and instantly incinerates him.
Wait, let me make sure I have this right. He saves a life, and Zeus immediately nukes him. That seems insanely disproportionate.
Well, think of the divine hierarchy like a cosmic immune system. Aesculapius introduced a virus immortality that threatened to alter the fundamental DNA of mortal existence.
Oh, I see.
Zeus acted as a cosmic white blood cell, eliminating the anomaly to preserve the ecosystem. The fallout, of course, was massive. Apollo, enraged by his son's execution, slaughters the Cyclops who manufactured Zeus's thunderbolts.
And Zeus retaliates by forcing Apollo into temporary slavery under a mortal king. But, ironically, Aesculapius achieves apotheosis anyway, becoming revered for centuries as a god of healing. He's associated with snakes and curing patients in their dreams. So, Aesculapius gets blasted out of existence for disrupting the natural order by saving a life. I want to put that exact reaction next to our final group, the Danaids. This is a story about 50 women who commit a coordinated, bloody mass murder.
Yeah, the Danaids were the 50 daughters of Danaus. They lived near the Nile, but their 50 cousins demanded to marry them. The women vehemently refused and fled across the sea to the Greek city of Argos to seek asylum.
And the city honored the sacred laws of hospitality and sanctuary. They vowed to protect the women from forced marriages, even as the cousins arrived with a fleet.
Yet, despite the city's protection, the source material inexplicably shifts. Suddenly, a massive wedding feast is taking place. The 50 daughters are married to the 50 cousins, and their father, Danaus, is hosting the banquet.
But he has secretly distributed daggers to each of his daughters. In the middle of the night, while their new husbands are asleep, 49 of these women plunge their daggers into the men, murdering them in their beds.
It is a staggering act of violence. Only one sister, Hypernestra, breaks the pact. She looks at her sleeping husband, Lynceus, and is overwhelmed by a sudden, intense pity. She wakes him and helps him escape into the night.
And her father imprisons her for her betrayal, though the poet Horace later immortalized her as splendidly false for choosing compassion over her familial oath.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for the 49 sisters who actually went through with the mass assassination? When they eventually arrive in the underworld, what is the grand cosmic punishment for slaughtering 49 men in their sleep?
They are forced to carry water from a river to fill a series of jars.
But the jars are riddled with holes. The water immediately drains out, and they are forced to walk back to the river and try again, for eternity.
It is a punishment of infinite futility.
This is where the ancient logic reveals its hand. Asclepius uses his brilliance to raise one man from the dead, and the king of the gods personally executes him with a weapon of mass destruction. These 49 sisters commit premeditated mass murder, and their punishment is bureaucratic busywork. They get assigned to carry leaky buckets in the underworld. It feels like the gods don't even care about murder.
Well, they don't, not in the way we do. If we connect the Danaids back to Asclepius, the distinction becomes crystal clear. The Danaids committed a purely human crime. They killed other mortals.
Right.
In that cosmic immune system we talked about, human murder is just localized inflammation. It doesn't threaten the gods. But Asclepius, he threatened to make humans immortal. He threatened the divide between heaven and earth. The gods punish human crimes with poetic annoyance, like leaky jars, but they punish cosmic threats with total annihilation.
It fundamentally changes how you engage with these texts. These myths aren't fables designed to teach you how to be a good moral citizen. They are survival guides for navigating a universe where the authorities are vastly powerful, highly emotional, and completely unaccountable.
Precisely. Human intent is merely a variable. The myths reflect a reality where survival depends on recognizing power dynamics, not relying on a guarantee of fairness. Whether it's Midas's foolish wishes, Glaucus's romantic blunders, or Asclepius's miraculous healing, you see a world where your desires are just pawns in the gods' chaotic games.
Which leaves you with a final thought to mull over. When we look at the arbitrary, disproportionate punishments in these ancient myths, Scylla mutating into a monster, Erysichthon devouring his own limbs, the endless frustration of the leaky jars, are they really just archaic fantasies from a primitive culture? Or are they actually a brilliant, exaggerated reflection of how chaotic and unfair human life, justice, and nature can feel today? If you had a divine power drop into your lap tomorrow, like the Midas touch or the ability to shapeshift, would you end up consumed by it? Or would you figure out a way to survive the gods' bizarre rules? Something to think about. Until next time.